Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Sonic Advance 3. In the last part we started off our time in and finished off Sunset Hill and started off Ocean Base here. And now it's time for us to go finish this zone off slowly as well as get into our next zone. Now I brought up last time that Ocean Base, despite its name, isn't much of a water level. There's water in some of the stages but mostly only at the bottom of the level design. Act 2 is one of those levels, so we are going to be dealing with water a little bit here, and you'll get to see Knuckles even do his little floating animation here for a little bit. Only he can do that, and it's useful here and again, but not too often. Water in this game controls the exact same way it did in the first two games, in fact in Sonic in general. Your momentum builds slower, but it also fades slower. We're mostly only going in here right now to get one of the Chao for this specific stage. With that said, you can still drown in the water, and they still do have the Plague of the Nightmares drowning theme. Get out of the water. Oh god. Don't like hearing that. When I first played this game, Ocean Base was probably, if not my least favorite level, probably my second least favorite level on the whole, mostly because I saw water and just really hated it. Honestly, nowadays though, this is probably either my favorite or second favorite level at large inside of this, or the other water level the game has, which is kind of funny to say. And it's largely because the late game levels in this game that have themes I usually like are just really annoying to play for one reason or another, in terms of either the gimmicks themselves being kind of annoying to work with, or just generally hating the level design of them in general. I'm especially looking at most of the entirety of the final world in this game, for instance. We are coming up on one of my least favorite Chao placements in the game, by the way, because it's actively behind an enemy, and it's the only time they do that in the game. Like, they'll hide Chao behind the rocks back in Sunset Hill, yeah, but at least those stand out because they're only something that can be broken. Enemies you're going to try to avoid more often than not anyway, so if you're going too fast, you're just going to completely miss that. I don't like it. In the meanwhile, though, I figured we might as well start talking about this game's dev staff, at least starting with the Sonic team members, who are a lot of familiar people if you're familiar with Sonic Team as a development team, period. There's 4 people listed for it. There's the producer, the game's director, the game's art director, and the assistant director, who are in order Yuji Naka, Akinora Nishiyama, Yuji Uekawa, and Ai Mashima. Yuji Naka, of course, prison joke, on top of being the head of Sonic Team and started as a programmer on Sonic 1 back in the day, Rodea the Sky Soldier. We all know who he is in this fan base at this point. Akinori Nishiyama, Sonic-wise at least, mostly started in special thanks sections starting in Sonic 2, but was a scenario writer for Sonic Adventure 1, directed the Advanced Trilogy as well as the first Sonic Rush title, and moved on to a producer role starting with the Sonic Gems collection and Sonic 06. He's also a producer on Phantasy Star Online 2, Nights into Dreams, and Resonance of Fate. And he was also a game designer on the Sega Saturn Magic Knight Rayearth title, a game I've never played but I've heard is really cool. Yuji Uekawa is another name that needs little introduction in the fan base, but for those that don't know, he started as a character designer on Rystar for the Genesis, before officially being an artist for Sonic, specifically starting in Sonic 3D Blast. He's most often a character designer for the series art right, or responsible for a lot of the 2D renders you see of the characters through the early 2000s, also being a frequent art director for the series, including here on the Advanced Trilogy as well as the Rush Trilogy in general. He's still deeply involved with the series, but starting around the turn of the 2010s, he started taking more supervisory roles for the series in general, especially when it came to art direction or character design stuff. And he's still doing that to this day, with his most recent credit being such in Sonic Racing Crossworlds, which released last year. The final member of main Sonic Team that's credited here is Ai Mashima as the assistant director, and she's also credited as such on Puyo Pop Fever, and she's a game designer on Puyo Puyo Fever 2 for the DS. But bizarrely, she's actively more adjacent to Pokemon, being credited in the special thanks sections of Ruby, Sapphire, Crystal, and Stadium 2, as well as Melee, Pokemon Puzzle Challenge, and pretty much all the games in the Pokemon Mini from 01 as far as I know. Her most recent credit is also Pokemon adjacent, being a planner for Pokemon Brilliant Diamond back in 2021. And that's actually all of the Sonic team members involved in development, albeit there's other Sega portions mentioned in the credits, usually regional stabs like localization, regional marketing, etc. But we'll get into the reason why about that in a few moments, as we have a minigame to talk about. I already showcased the minigame where you need to push a switch quickly enough to get points. This is the other notable minigame type you can get in the game largely, where you just need to kill enemies within a certain time frame. I think the faster you do it, the more lives you get, but actually I did this one entirely by accident because, frankly, it's very easy to get accidentally taken into the teleporters that take you either to the minigames or the boss fights, even in some cases. In the meanwhile, while I do this, I should also note I didn't actually mention the times you need to get the various medals from Ocean Base Act 2. To get the gold medal in Act 2, you need to beat that stage within a 3-minute, 30-second timer. To get the silver medal, you need to beat it within 4 minutes and 30 seconds. And of course, as usual, just to get the bronze medal, you gotta finish the act in any time that's higher than 4 minutes 30. So we've already covered the Sonic Team people involved largely, as well as just briefly touched on the fact that there's other Sega portions, but they weren't this game's main developers. I'm not even sure how much I've talked about this in Sonic Advance 1 and 2 up to this point, but Sonic Advance 1 and 2, alongside several other ports or handheld adjacent Sonic games throughout the mid to late 2000s, were instead developed by a company known as DIMPS. If I am covering information I already covered in my Sonic Advance 1 and 2 LPs, I'm sorry, but it's been years at this point, and I do not quite recall if I talked about this at all there. And I figure I might as well talk about it before I finish the Advance trilogy, just in case. But yeah, DIMPS. DIMPS was actively founded by a lot of former developers from Capcom and SNK, led by an individual named Takashi Nishiyama, who was also a former Capcom and SNK employee, and created two little franchises called Street Fighter and Fatal Fury, one for each of those two companies, which is kind of nuts to think about that Street Fighter technically led to the Advanced Trilogy in a lot of ways. For every single credit I mention throughout the rest of this LP, whenever I find time to talk about them, assume they're a member of DIMPS, as they are largely the creatives responsible for the Advanced Trilogy, the Rush Trilogy, so to speak, as well as both parts of Sonic 4, and I think also the PS2 version of Unleashed, I want to say specifically, which is closer to the version that I grew up playing, because when Unleashed came out, I actively played the Wii release, not the HD release. I had a PS3 at that time, but I preferred to play it on the Wii, and I genuinely could not tell you why. I think it was just the fact that it was the one that was in a room I preferred to be in, ultimately. Why is that spike there? That little blip right there is honestly pretty emblematic of a lot of the design issues, I think, when it comes to level design in Sonic Advance 3. It's not just the Crusher Cubes, or how I wish the camera moved a little bit more to the right so you could see things coming. There's times where, if you use a mechanic they placed there, you might just get punished for it because of a spike that's placed weirdly or otherwise. And a lot of people like to say that's the case in every DIMPS-developed Sonic title, especially by the time you reach the Sonic 4 duology, they did get really spam-happy with the speed boosters. I don't think that's fair in a lot of regards. I think each of the DIMPS games have a lot of strong values in them. Sonic Advance 1 and 2, I do just genuinely adore. Oh god, I had no way of seeing that was there, huh? It's just that there's times where it feels like the level design is at odds with what they want to try and do with the game in general, and that's especially clear here in Advance 3. I'm trying to think, do I think this has the worst level design in any DIMPS game for Sonic specifically? God, no. I think Sonic 4, Episode 1 and 2, I think do have some of the worst level designs, period. But this definitely has some of the most just evil hazard placement they ever did. I think Sonic Advance 1 and 2's level designs are fine. Sonic Rush Trilogy, including Sonic Colors DS, is fine with it. This is probably the worst with it they ever got. Either way, at this point, we've gained all 10 Chao across the hub world and the 3 main acts, so it's time for us to go find a special key. And I like to do Act 1 for this stage in specific, only because the 5 locations or so that every single stage has, I find to be the most reasonable to find in one go in this specific stage. This is actually probably the latest I found a special key in a stage across the entire playthrough, honestly, because again, I get really lucky this playthrough because either they're very early in the stage, I check for one, or I get them along the way after getting the 10th Chao largely for some reason. I don't know why. I have never gotten this lucky in this game. Quote-unquote streamer luck, quote-unquote, which is usually the opposite because of the LP curse and all that jazz or something like that. But that also means it's time for us to go after our 3rd special stage once we finish this, but hey, that's nice and easy. Now, something I haven't quite talked about in regards to the special stages is actively sort of related to depth perception, but not really. The depth perception in these ones, as I mentioned, are way better than they were in Sonic Advance 1, just in general, due to the added floor and all that, outside of the mines sometimes being a little hard to read with where they're going. But there is one thing that's really awkward about how the positioning works in the special stages, namely when you hit the blue speed-up rings that double your ring values that you collect along the way. I don't know quite how to parse it, but something about the X-shaped wing mode that the Tornado 2 goes into from Sonic Adventure when you go into that speed-up formation messes with my understanding of the hitbox in the special stages. I'm not sure if it's that your hitbox is still your lead character, so you need to aim with the back of the ship rather than aiming with their bodies outright or what, but it often leads to me missing the first chunk of rings on any given special stage after a blue speed up ring. And that's real rough because those can be the make or break when it comes to the later special stages especially. Also, peeling back the curtain a little bit here for two audio related things. For one thing, in my own specific time where I'm recording this, it's becoming summer, of course, because it's, early May. So I'm going to have fans on a little more often, so if you hear some background noise from those, I'm sorry, it's just that I don't want to be melting alive. And another thing, I'm not sure if it's even going to happen throughout the rest of the parts, but for some reason, whenever I open this specific video's project file on my computer, my CPU usage just jumps up to like 95 plus for some reason, and my CPU's fan is going off like a madman about 2 feet to my right. So if you can hear that in the final audio, I'm sorry. There's literally nothing I can do about it. It's only happening with this specific project file too for some reason. I'm not sure if it's just the amount of recordings that are in it or what. It hasn't done this with a lot of the other LPs I've done recently. I don't know what's going on. And actually, you know what? A third audio thing. There's at least one level in this game. I think it's here in this world. If it's not this one, it's like the zone 2 zones from now. The audio is just going to start jumping and crackling a little bit in one of the stage recordings, and I don't know why. It's not the only time that's happened recently, but I was able to cover up the other one because it was during the credit sequence for Ninja Gaiden Shadow. For some reason, that song got weirdly crackly. Maybe it's tied to something with an OBS update or something, but it also only ever happened in one recording of this game, so That's 3 Chaos Emeralds down, 4 to go, by the way, and I believe that also marks what I would generally consider the last easy special stage. Moving forward, they're either going to get a lot trickier about ring placements, or a mistake where you hit a bomb or an enemy and lose 5 rings is going to get a lot more costly a lot more quickly. With that said, that also means we're now on to the ocean base boss fight, which is honestly a really cool fight as well. Also, now I think about it, I was wrong about something last time. I said earlier that you generally will fight Gemroll before the boss fight in levels where you don't gain a character. That's just untrue. You fight Gemroll just intermittently, period, because we don't fight him before this boss fight at all. Boss fight of Ocean Base is the scarily named Egg Foot. This boss is going to jump high up in the air and move left to right. Your goal is to be between the legs so that when it lands down on the floor, you can jump into Eggman and hit him and do damage. If you're good with timing, you can even hit him twice. The trick here is that every now and then when he moves back downwards, he's going to flip his feet around to have the toes on the inside and try to crush you with them. It's not an instant death like a certain boss fight in Sonic Advance 2, but it does make you lose rings, so watch out for that. If you're lucky, your partner might also get an extra hit on this fight overall. It's a very fun fight, and it's one that actively goes by pretty quickly, too. Not even a really complicated one compared to certain other fights. There's the toe attack. Also, it also sends a shockwave out along either side about half the screen's width. I always forget about that. Mostly because there's some fights with the Eggfoot where he just doesn't do that attack for some reason. It's just completely random when he decides to do it. I've had fights where he just never does it. I've also had fights where it feels like he does it every second jump, so mileage may vary. In order to get the gold medal against this boss fight, you need to defeat the boss within 1 minute and 45 seconds. To get the silver medal, do so within 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Overall, very doable, assuming they're not super spam happy with the crash down attack instead of their standard jumps. With that, we're now moving into the 4th zone of the game, which is not my least favorite, but definitely the one I have the least fun playing, if that makes any difference. I don't hate playing this zone, I just don't have fun with it. This is Toy Kingdom. This zone is going to have a bunch of clackers that you can use as platforms, knocking back and forth. These also become kind of a common thing in later stages as well. There's some balloons you can bounce on to actively get some extra air. And there's also little theme park attractions. There's little elephant-themed slides that act as extra ramps for you to slide along. There's panda cups you get into, and they'll just slide along a certain pathway, but you can jump out of them early. There's rockets you can cling onto and all that. There's a lot of mechanics in this stage, but there's also just a lot of minute separations of pathways in order to get certain Chao, of course. Medal-wise, here in Toy Kingdom Act 1, in order to get the gold, you need to beat this stage within 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and getting the silver requires doing the same within 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Again, as you can see, the levels in this game quickly get towards the 4-minute mark if you even want to get like a semi-decent medal ranking. Not that it really matters outside of bragging rights to my knowledge. I don't think you get anything for getting all of a certain medal type. Future me, if I'm wrong, correct me on that. I don't think that's the case. But I also have maybe only ever done that once, if even. Again, Sonic Advance 3 is definitely the game of the trilogy I revisit the least, despite having some of the most experience with it, barring Sonic Advance 2. Although, honestly, when it comes to, like, the Dimps Sonic games, period, at least the handheld adjacent ones, the one I played the most was probably Advance 2 or Rush Adventure. But that's also because Rush Adventure had something I had to farm out, which I enjoyed doing, which I know some people don't enjoy doing in that specific game for reasons we'll get to whenever I start doing the Rush games after this. I kind of need to go back and do some of the early 3D games as well as Pocket Adventure before I probably get too much further in, because, not for nothing, I've done a decent job about cleaning up the classic era of Sonic prior to this. Now, I've mentioned in general that Advance 3 has a bit of a crushing problem when it comes to blocks if you're going too quickly. Toy Kingdom probably has some of my least favorite versions of that, but not because the blocks are harder to avoid. If anything, they're actually easier to avoid here. I just think they're pace breakers even compared to some of the other things in this game. Specifically, it's usually blocks that are in vertical shafts as wide as they are, with a path going through them that is about the same width. And usually a good route's one way or the other, but also in some cases the Chao is up one route, but not the other where progress is, and it's just a lot of more stop and go again, which I'm fine with slower platforming levels in Sonic. I just want them to be consistent with them throughout a given level. Honestly, a good way to do this would probably be doing something weirdly like the Mach Speed sections in Sonic 06, where it's like, alright, Act 1 of a zone is where you get used to the mechanics, so it's a little bit of a slower mentality, platforming level. Act 2, they use them, but in ways that better reward speed, I guess, could be a way to put it. I guess what it could be is that at this point in my life, I just like to see consistency in a platforming level. Even if it's not level-to-level consistency. If you want to do a slower level, do a slower level. If you want to do a faster level, do a faster level. Doing one that goes back and forth, unless the literal mechanic is like time shifting or lower gravity in certain segments, just doesn't exactly feel the best to me anymore. Helps, mind you, that I'm at this point closing in on 30, so I've seen so many things where the inconsistency just doesn't work as I get older and older. Either way, welcome to Toy Kingdom Act 2. In order to get the gold medal in this stage, you need to beat the stage within 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and as usual, getting the silver medal in this stage requires beating it within 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Again, about a minute difference between the two medals, outside of boss fights, where it's usually like a 30-second or so difference, usually. What I will say about Toy Kingdom as well is that largely the first 3 zones in this game don't have too many bottomless pits. There's maybe 1 per zone, and it's usually one that's decently easily avoided. Crushing or things like that are usually what you're going to die from more often than not. Toy Kingdom is where they actively start throwing bottomless pits into the mix, and while they're nowhere near as level spanning, so to speak, as they were in Advance 2, but if you're not careful, they're very easy to fall into the further you get into in the game. Act 2 in specific here has a couple that if you're not careful you can go right into, though some of them are at least kind enough in that they're right after one of the elephant slides, and as long as you actively use the slide as a slide, you'll go over the pit no problem. Also, I just realized there's one mechanic I haven't talked about in here yet, and they're little toy boxes you can stand on. You might notice sometimes they're springs, sometimes they shoot out spikes. I kind of ignore these ones here, but the way these actively work is that it depends on what color is at the center of the box when you jump on them. If you jump on them and the diamond in the center is blue, a spring will come out. If it's red, spikes will come out. So time your jumps carefully there, because if you're not careful, it's very easy to miss that even by frames and just get a spike shoved right up Sonic's ass. At this point, though, let's start talking about the DIMP side of this game's development staff, starting off with this game's producer, Koichi Sakita. He started off as a character designer for SNK, doing so in some form for Riding Hero as well as the original Fatal Fury, both in terms of its arcade ports as well as home console releases. He was then the art director for Fatal Fury Wild Ambition on the PS1 before leaving SNK to join DIMPS. While there, he was a design director for Shaman King, King of Spirits on PS1, as well as Inuyasha, A Feudal Fairy Tale on PS1, before being a producer on all 3 Sonic Advance titles, as well as the Sonic Rush duology, alongside Sonic 4 Episode 1. Now, we are coming up on the end of the part, and I should note before we get into the next video that if you're playing as different character combos right now for some reason, if you have Tails or Knuckles in the lead, put Sonic in the lead going into Toy Kingdom Act 3. As if you do so and finish that stage, you are going to unlock your next character over there. And trust me, while it's probably my least favorite character to play as overall with most character combos, she's interesting enough where you're going to want to grab her. Otherwise, you're going to need to do the final boss maybe one more time than you want to, because again, I think clearing the final boss without all characters unlocked does unlock the others. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 4, we're going to go finish off Toy Kingdom before moving into Zone 5. See you guys then.